The disadvantage of going in the afternoon is that if you have speakers who take the things that you were going to say, they've already been said. So I'm just going to amplify this morning what the chair, Hochschild, said about the word crisis is danger and opportunity. It's the Chinese character is danger and opportunity. I want you to keep that in mind. And then the last panel, you heard the phrase, don't let a good crisis go to waste. That's actually made famous by a former mayor of Chicago, Rahm Emanuel, who was the chief of staff to Bill Clinton, and a congressman. In crisis, in danger, in activities that are really, really challenging is an opportunity. And I want to make sure that we understand you're here at the Anderson School to get an MBA. You're at the Center for Action. Is that right? Is that what it's called? What? Impact. Sorry, Center for Impact. You're wanting to make a difference. You're wanting an MBA. I would submit to you that given the fires, given the tragedy that we've had, there is both danger and opportunity, and you ought to be thinking about how to do well by doing good. How do we make something here for ourselves and do well, but by also doing good in the world, given what's in front of us. So that's the sort of framework of things. I'm going to ask each of the speakers to talk a little bit about their organization and when the fires hit. By the way, this was planned before the fires. It was going to be public-private partnership. When the fires hit, it just made no sense to not take advantage of the tragedy and say, look, let's talk about it. What did it mean? So I want the speakers to talk a little bit at the beginning about when the fires hit, or now, what's your organization's perspective on what is going on? What's the activity? What's happening from your organization's perspective? And then we'll try and chat a little bit about how they compare to each other, et cetera. We're going to start with Nina, who was personally impacted by the fire in the Palisades. I'll let her chat about that. And then professionally is, as you can tell, with an organization that manages post-tragedy. Nina.
Thank you so much, Chad, and thank you so much to the Anderson School for having me today. I'll just put it out there. As he mentioned, I was personally impacted by the fires in Palisades. We lost our home. I'm married, I have 2 children and a dog. And we're still in the middle of it. I will say it's been a month and some days, but we're definitely still in the middle of this really crazy roller coaster. The irony is not lost on me. I think you and I share the longest title up here, but really what I do is climate and disaster resilience, kind of smushed together there. And what that means is talking about how climate change and weather patterns impact communities, societies, individuals, households, and then what happens during the events, and then what's called response and then recovery. And so, as I mentioned, being in the unique position at CORE, I run the climate and disaster resilience programming, but CORE is a humanitarian organization that it's been around for over a decade and has gone to many catastrophic tsunamis, hurricanes, earthquakes, pretty much everywhere that has happened on the globe, but especially most recently here in our own nation. And that's when the organization decided to add a pillar to our strategy, which was called Climate and Disaster Resilience. So, as I sit here and look at everybody's faces, I'm like, what is like a very important thing I want everyone to know and understand about climate and disaster resilience? And I think I want to start with the thought that this was a collective trauma. Yes, I was personally impacted. There's no competition here, whether you lost a home, you were evacuated, you weren't evacuated, you thought you were going to be. There was trauma across the city. And somebody knew somebody who was personally impacted if you weren't yourselves. So don't discount that. That's real. And just, think about that. Think about your loved ones and anybody else you might want to reach out to who had the same experience, because that community, that being able to touch another person and talk about something that's real, that we all experienced, is incredibly important. And it's one of the things that we teach whenever we talk to people about preparedness and also response and long-term recovery. Community means everything. And it does mean something different to everyone. But if you think about the people you go to school with, the people you work with, your friends, your family, your faith-based communities, they're all made up of different people, different walks of life, different backgrounds, but we all share the same sort of collective trauma, as I mentioned before. And disasters are considered a great equalizer. It doesn't matter how much money you had or how big your house was. You still lost everything you owned. You lost your security. You lost your privacy. You lost anything that was sacred to you. Maybe it was pictures. Maybe it was mementos. The point I'm getting at is while this is heavy and this is deep, this is also an opportunity, just like Chad mentioned, to really look at, okay, what happened during these fires? What happened before the fires? What's going on right now with the rebuild? And looking, at all of these individual phases, not as, different silos, but like a continuum. And for those of you who are innovators, who are thinking about, strategically, what can I do? In a moment like this, with regards to the wildfires, it's important to look at the places where you see gaps, where someone said, oh, I wished we could have, or maybe if only we did. And really hold on to those nuggets of information and think about where you could plug in. One last thing before I move on here from the fires is there's a very, very eerie and telling YouTube video, if you guys have not seen it, it was floating around, that was produced by the LAFD back in 1962. And it was the 1961 Bel Air Brentwood fires. And if some of you may or may not remember that, or had family members who were impacted, it is so eerie to watch that video because it is almost identical to what we were watching on television, to what I was living through. And to see some of those lessons not learned is hard. It's hard to take. So we really need to learn from history, but then also kind of look at it from the opportunity to take something on now as an innovative approach to make sure that things like that don't happen again. We're not going to be able to stop wildfires. They're always going to be around. We're not going to be able to stop floods. But how you prepare yourself, your knowledge base about the weather, it's not just something that's passing and maybe you need a jacket. Pay attention to the weather. It's important. This is our guide for how to live in our new climate reality.
Great. Thank you, Nina. So when Nina tells her kids take a jacket to go outside, you really mean take a jacket. Thank you. Author named Mike Davis wrote a book called Ecology of Fear. If you haven't read it, it documents what's been going on in Southern California for decades. By the way, who was around in 1962? Yeah, thanks. One or two, right? So not a lot of folks, but yeah.
The video's on YouTube.
Yes, it's on YouTube.
Yeah, it's
and
called
you can,
Design for Disaster. That's a nice title.
if you want to talk to somebody who has taken into account what's happened in the history and what is happening now, and is fashioning his or her work or world in terms of understanding history and the impact. Who's that?
Design for Disaster.
That's right. And of course, you're sitting next to Nurit, and she's the troublemaker, so there you go. Look, I would submit to you that the insurance industry probably does that better than darn near anybody. That is what they do. They look at data, and I'm not going to steal your thunder, but they look at data and they understand how to project forward, and that's how their business operates. Bruce, if you can tell us, sort of, and by the way, the insurance industry was challenged and complicated before these fires. Mm-hmm. In California, especially, you can all look at it. It's documented. Big, huge structural issues. Everybody was concerned about it. This put an extra finer point on it. And I've asked Bruce to talk about sort of what that feels like, looks like right now, given the fires, the industry at large, but also right now.
Sure. Ken called me to ask me to speak at an energy conference, and I said, what are you talking about? He said, well, we want to touch on the fires. I said, okay, well, insurance, that's, as Bex painfully pointed out, I've done for over 30 years. And I'm going to start saying over 25, because I think is that good enough? 25 to make you an expert. And thank you, the one person in the room that wore red today on Valentine's Day. So happy Valentine's Day, everybody.
That's right. Pink and red.
Needless to say, all of our hearts go out to the people that lost loved ones, lost their home. I'm sitting next to Nina. I didn't realize until just now that you had lost your home. So I'm so sorry for your loss. So me as an insurance broker, our insurance agency insured several clients, not just the homeowners, but also several businesses in Malibu and in the Palisades that lost everything. We're in a good position in that, we're a strong insurance brokerage firm and we have good insurance companies that we're able to perform. And I don't want to name names, but companies like Hartford, Travelers, Chubb Insurance. These companies are real insurance companies. And unfortunately, a lot of people in not just Southern California, but in California in general have been dropped. And I just want to touch on the fact that people are like, well, this is ridiculous. We've had Allstate for 20 years, or we've had State Farm, or we've had whomever, Chubb, for 20 years. They can't just drop us. Actually, they can. And part of the problem has been in California for years now, the insurance commissioner has basically, from a consumer protection, someone's nodding their head, from a consumer protection agency, they've said, hey, you can't raise Ken's rates 10% next year for his homeowners. You can raise it 3%. And that goes on year after year. Insurance is just a big bowl of money that we all put money into, and hopefully none of us ever use it. Somebody loses their house, we pour a whole bunch on that. So what's happened is, over years, the insurance commissioners of California have said, no, you may not raise your rates. And that's why insurance companies are saying, well, we can no longer make money being an insurance company in California because we can't charge. Insurance companies have been around a long time, and they hire these people called actuaries. And I don't know if there's anybody here that's ever thought about the actuarial career. Very, very smart people. Not the most fun people at parties, but these guys and gals, they put together an algorithms that basically say, let's look at the wildfire statistics, let's look at the cost of housing, let's look at the cost of labor, cost of building materials, and let's say, here's what we need to charge for an insurance policy in the state of California. And the insurance commissioner comes along and says, well, no, you need to charge less than that. So that's why these mean insurance companies are pulling. They're for profit. It's not a right. You don't have the right to Allstate or State Farm or Chubb or whoever. There's no particular insurance company. It's just been a problem. So what's happened is a lot of those policies have been canceled. Well, now what do? Well, you can go get what's called a surplus lines insurance, which is going to cost you 5 or 6 times as much. Or there's the California Fair Plan, which is taking on, it's a last resort. And I think a lot of people in the Palisades had the Fair Plan. I don't know if you guys did. So thank goodness, because now I'm going to dig on the Fair Plan. But
it's okay, buddy.
So first idea for these bright, innovative minds in the room is, places like the California Fair Plan. It's the insurance of last resort for Californians. So if you can't get insurance from an insurance company, nobody wants to take your risk. You have to buy it from the state. And what it is, it's a pool. And what happens is, when there's big losses like there have been, they go back and assess all the other insurance companies to pay more for the losses in the Fair Plan. And it's not great insurance coverage, but at least it's something. So from an innovative standpoint, that's one area we could look at. Do you want to get into other ideas of innovations or what we could do?
However you want to set the stage, because we're going to talk about a lot.
So some of the ideas, Ken and I talked like, well, what can we do going forward? This is what's happened. Your insurance rates in California are going to go up. They just are. We're all going to share in this. Insurance is just, again, a big pool of money we all share. So rates are going to continue to go up. I believe the insurance commissioner has now approved several carriers to raise the rates to actuarially sound rates, where they can actually make money. Imagine if you had a restaurant, your average meal cost you $20 to make, and you want to sell it for $22 on the menu. And you're like, okay, we're barely making a profit here. And the governor walks in, I shouldn't say that, a person from Sacramento walks in, and they say, this is a nice restaurant you got here. I like the place. It's no French Laundry, but what do you charge for a meal? And we say $22, and they go, people in California can't afford that, so $18.50 is your price. And the restaurant owner just says, I can't make money. It's the same exact thing happened to our industry. So what do we do going forward? You probably heard, you all know that there's safe space. A lot of the issue was with brush. So clearing the brush, using more fire-resistant materials, maybe innovating some new vents that can close the attic vents in the case of a fire. Maybe we've all seen this, the red stuff that's dropped from FosCheck. We've all seen that. Maybe there's a way, some innovative minds here, put together a 100-gallon tank of FosCheck on the roof of every house and have it disperse in the midst of a wildfire. Or water tanks, or bury water tanks in the yard of every home, so that if there is a fire, if the hydrants are dry, you have at least 400 or 500 gallons there to work with, whether you or the fire department. Those are some of the ideas. Obviously, fire-resistant materials is a key in building sustainability with materials that can withstand some of that, and getting rid of soffits and getting rid of your gutters that collect pine needles all day long. Embers will just torch your house on fire. So those are just some of the ideas, and I look forward to any other innovative ideas that you guys may have as far as what can we do going forward. These are some of the things. And lastly, I'll mention, they're talking about putting in whole house sprinkler systems, not inside, but outside. So you see the big pipes on the roof with sprinkler systems that can water down the entire area. You're going to probably have to have a water tank on site to do this, and it's not going to be pretty, but it's one of those things that these are just ideas to help get insurance companies interested in coming back and saying, not only are you worth the risk, but it's a good risk.
Yeah, so it's that last part that I want to hold on to. I mean, all these wonderful ideas are about the structural problem that is preventing the insurance industry from being here, right? You've got a problem that you laid out, whether you agree it's a problem or not, but the government has created a situation where insurance companies, according to their actuarials, can't make the money. So they want to leave. So then you have a crisis, and then people are without insurance. And all these other little ideas, is this one I want to hear about here, is what could you do to fix a piece of that market to make the insurance company go, well, if every house had that, okay, I would be in. Right? I live in a hillside in Pasadena. When I was fixing my house and redoing my house, I had to put water sprinklers. Had to put water sprinklers in the house. Cost me an extra $7,500. Had to do it because it was required because I lived in a hillside. Because I wouldn't have been able to get insurance, and the city didn't want any of the responsibility. So that's a fix, maybe not an entrepreneurial fix, maybe a government fix, but somebody has to make those sprinklers. Somebody has to sell those sprinklers. Somebody has to make the plastic that makes the sprinklers. So that's an entrepreneurial fix, right? There's money to be made there by doing a good job. Who's thinking about this kind of stuff on a huge scale would be your utilities, right? The utilities are deep into understanding what happens to a community when there's an emergency, dealing with the entire question of insurance, right? Of what are we supposed to do to protect our investment, right? And by the way, keeping the lights on at an affordable rate so you don't fall off your chair when the bill comes, right? That's what the utilities are trying to do, is keep the lights on. So Anuj, how do you see sort of this space, especially in light of the fires?
Yeah, thank you for having me here today, and giving me a chance to speak to you on behalf of the company as well. Appreciate having the time and space. I think Nina did an excellent job of setting the stage, so thank you for that. There's a lot in there I'd like to just kind of briefly uplift again. And like her, I was personally impacted by the fires. I think we all probably know somebody who's is still impacted by the fires. We're probably all dealing with this. At the company itself, there's I'd say several dozen employees who've lost their homes, and particularly when it comes to the Eaton fire, we serve that area, the Altadena area, and many of us live there, and so it's been very impactful. As far as kind of this particular how we've been dealing with climate risks at the company overall. We think about this as kind of we think about delivering electricity safely, reliably, and affordably. And those are sort of three poles that they're sometimes at tension with each other. It's a very typical kind of mission for a utility, those three parameters. But that safely component, I think, is kind of where this conversation connects to for us. We've been thinking about safety for a while. That could have started with something like earthquake risk a few decades ago. But more recently, we've been thinking about climate risk. And so the kind of work we tend to do in this area is for our 50,000 square mile service area, we've been doing what we call vulnerability assessments. And that is something that we do every 4 years, where we take climate forecasts and take a look at how that will impact our assets, operations, and services. And then we propose to our regulator on that cycle every 4 years climate-informed investments that we'd like to make in the grid in order to help mitigate some of these hazards. And so we're primarily looking at 4 hazards: wildfire, inland flooding, sea level rise, and extreme heat. Those are kind of the ones that impact our service area. So we've started this history of kind of thinking about climate as another risk, another form of physical risk to the grid, I'll say. And then alongside that, when it comes to wildfires specifically, we have a process in place where we've been investing. We propose an action plan, essentially. It's called the Wildfire Mitigation Plan, to the governor's office every 3 years, and that kind of details how we're going to specifically respond to that particular hazard. And so that tends to run to be about, can be $5 billion every cycle. The kinds of things that we invest in include covered conductor, which is a covered conductor technology, which is an alternative to undergrounding that essentially you can think about it as wrapping wires in a protective, and wrapping them in a way that helps prevent ignition, utility-related ignition. So we've done about 4,400 miles of covered conductor. We've done about, we've invested in about a little over 200, I think, right around 200 cameras that are typically in remote regions that help with wildfire detection. We've invested in, what else do we have? Three helitankers. These helitankers are the largest in the world in terms of the model type that we lease and then hand off to the counties, the surrounding counties that we serve, in order to operate. And then alongside that, we've done fire wrapping of poles, other sort of opportunities or other sort of technology or investments of that nature for the grid itself, just to kind of warm us up around what kind of things are out there if you're interested in this space. There's obviously a need for more. There's a need for thinking about rethinking what is that best available information that we've been using when we think about a place like Altadena, where a lot of the area that burned was not previously thought of to be as a high fire region. And I think alongside that, the other thing I'd just like to add at this juncture is there's a lot to be done, and there's a lot of investment that takes place in the grid itself. There's a need for innovation in that space. But I think as you all are thinking about that as well, this particular problem, one of the big learnings that we've had as we've been investing in the grid, and we've done some investments outside of the grid, I'll say, is that it's really a multi-sector. It's really a multi-sector challenge. So it really requires the private sector, the public sector, community leaders all coming together. So it's really like a public-private community partnership to tackle, to tackle climate risk and to build resilient communities as we move forward. So there's all kinds of space for, yes, private sector innovation, but I think a resilient community also has healthy, strong social infrastructure. We're seeing a lot of that in our area in response to the disaster, right? The way that all of us and so many are coming together to help those who've lost homes. But that kind of thing needs to be invested in a go-forward basis. It needs to be invested in pre-disaster, not post-disaster. And so I think as you think about the work that you're doing, it's really important to think about how it connects to public sector innovation, how it connects to social innovation, how it has a place that's not isolated within one component, but is thinking more holistically about the way that these solutions require, the way these problems require these multi-sector solutions.
Thank you, Anuj. It's important to note too that when Bruce, you were talking about insurance companies, their option is if you're not making enough money, you can leave. Utilities can't leave, and they're an investor-owned utility. They're regulated, so the government does say you can only make so much on your investment. So the government says, okay, invest in this and this and this, and don't invest in that, and we're going to give you money for that, right?
That's right.
And so when you say $5 billion recommendation to the governor, if the governor says we'll give you $4 billion, that's $1 billion that you're not going to do, and then that all goes into your rates. Question is, would you be willing to deal with 20% less electricity? Every 5 days, you just won't have power. No, we're not going to deal with that. He's trying to keep the lights on 24/7, 365, and have it affordable and have it safe, right? All that takes money and an investment. Where is the potential Where's the potential entrepreneur that says, have I got an idea for Edison that will help mitigate X? Talk to Anuj, and then it'll go in the next plan to invest in the state of California's electric grid. It's not as simple as turning the lights on, basically, is really my point. So I want to ask, well, there's a bunch of questions here, but let me just ask this. Given what you said, let's start with you, Nina. What is stopping, in your perspective, what's in your way? What is stopping you from not having to do your job, which is the second part of your job, which is the cleanup part, right? What is preventing you? Is there something in the market? Is there something in policy? What is there?
I know the last speaker or the last session, they were talking about behavioral changes. And I think that's really the crux of it, is understanding that this isn't someone else's job. This isn't someone else's responsibility. It's your responsibility. It's your responsibility to keep yourself educated, to know what's coming. The day of the fires, there were people out shopping, there were just going about their day, doing things, even though we had been warned for about a week, even up to the day that we were going to have hurricane force winds, that there was high fire risk, that, please pay attention to what's going on. But people were still just going about their day. I was getting my family ready because I knew that if a spark happened, we would be in trouble. I have a little bit of, it's preparedness guilt or something like that because, we had the information. But it's really behavioral change, education, knowledge. Somebody's not going to give you all of the information that you need. Everybody's unique. Your housing situation is unique. You may be in an apartment building. You may be in a dorm. You may be, with parents or people who have actual access functional needs. So having a plan, and everyone talks about the go bag and the evacuation plan and the alerts, all of it together will make you safer. But even if you do just one of those things, have a go bag or have the alerts on your phone, you will be ahead of the curve there, as you say. So from a roadblock standpoint, I would just say interest. Disasters can be, it's like slowing down to watch a train wreck, right? Everybody was glued to their televisions. Some people could watch it, some people couldn't. But watching it happen and knowing, oh my gosh, so-and-so is being impacted, or that could be me.
Let me just interrupt, because there's a question that's connected to that. I just want to add to it. Why does it take a horrible situation to realize how archaic our system is? Why is the red tape and funding so challenging despite our innovations? The other thing is PPPs, public-private, have historically excluded communities and caused uneven development. How do we ensure climate resilience is equitable in those communities? So and we'll get to I want to get the other, but I think it's part of what you're saying is we each have a responsibility, right? But in some communities or some policies are not affecting other places. Right. And it's uneven. It's uneven.
That's where the private, public, and community partnerships come in.
Okay.
I looked that up the other day, and it's actually an acronym, PPCP.
Okay.
I don't know. Anyway, so it is a real thing, right? And that's exactly what needs to be used here, because the roadblocks are many. It's behavioral change, it's, individual interests, it's, the dollar sign, what people are seeing in this redevelopment in both Altadena and the Palisades. So having the ear of the community and having experts, not just environmental people who are coming to tell you whether the ground is cleaned or not and, whether there's any more toxicity in your water, but real, disaster and climate resilience experts to come talk to communities before they start to rebuild. That kind of information, I think, is just invaluable. But people don't know that it exists out there, that this information is free and available to anybody who wants to look it up. AI is a great gift right now. Who knows what the future brings? I was thinking about AI with the actuarial talk that you were saying, how to, put AI into the problem and figure that out. But yeah, it's really having that collaboration, but it starts with individual action.
Yeah. I would also say it seems to be the uneven awareness when you're talking about communities that are focused on, they've got 3 or 4 jobs, the 4 kids, and they've got to get the food, and they're busy on survival. It's very hard to get up and think about, okay, what are we going to do in an emergency? Yeah. And that, who is that incumbent on to educate communities that aren't thinking or aren't able to think about that? Here, I think you're right. Whoever said this is a great equalizer, right? I mean, Palisades isn't that community, and it got burned down. Altadena is a middle class, and it got burned down. But it's often disproportionate to communities that are not aware of it. And who is that incumbent on to make aware? Is that a market opportunity? Is that a smart entrepreneur is figuring out, if I could tell the insurance companies that I was able to make that community really aware, and we were able to turn them, have them buy the vents and buy all the stuff, I think you could sell that to an insurance company as a way to have an impact on rates, right? That's the kind of thinking to take advantage of this tragedy.
They do that today. There's Firewise communities, and
Yes.
also I think the National Institutes of
Yeah.
Business Insurers does
Yeah.
something like
And-
that. But
and-
it's still, I mean, it's clunky.
Yeah, and the PUC, which regulates Edison, have programs, energy utility upgrade, or the EUC, Energy Utility California, right? That pays to go out and let people know about efficiency stuff. They're pay organizations to go out and tell them how to be more efficient. Well, why don't we go out and pay them to be more Firewise, right? There are programs. That's an entrepreneur thinking about how do I do well by doing good here.
I think Nina's point is important as well. Is that you don't necessarily need to invent these things. They do
Yeah.
exist,
Some exist.
not always at scale.
Yeah.
That's which is where many of your expertise may lie, right? Like how do you scale something?
Our high property value, Bruce, our high property value is manipulated for the benefit of real estate companies or developers, even though they carry high risks. That's a risk question. That's why I asked
So
it.
high property values?
Yeah, you may not be able to answer that, but are high property values manipulated for the benefit of real estate companies, developers, even though they carry high risks?
So my response to that would be, whoever asked that question, thank you. From a risk standpoint, you might pay $13 million for a home in Palisades. And the reconstruction cost, the insurance cost, might only be $1 million or less. It's the dirt, it's the view you're paying for. So when it comes to insurance, do we manipulate prices? No, again, I'm gonna go back to those actuarial people. We have a really good idea. If you've got a 3,000 square foot house, here's exactly how much, and they know the quality materials, and you got marble floors and all the yada, 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 the heated floors in the bathroom, you high-end people. That's great, and good for you.
Everybody has heated floors in the
And I'm happy
bathroom.
for you. Everybody does, right? I don't have that. So they know how much it's going to cost to insure that on a pool basis. So do they manipulate the values? I would say no.
Yeah. And there's another question here that's saying, taking on the entire capitalist society, are we able to do this? But well, I don't know. I think they have fires and disasters in non-capitalist societies. But the fact of the matter is, it's part of our ecosystem, and we're trying to figure out how to deal with it from a market or perspective, right? In this space, how do we do well by doing good? What's the way we can find a place in the market to have an advantage? Yeah.
Well, let me add one other thing in the insurance industry, because as Bex pointed out, I've been around a long time. Can anybody tell me what the largest insurable loss in the United States of America was?
Hurricane.
And he has no MTA cards to give away.
guess so.
I have no cards. Did I hear Katrina? I think I heard Katrina. So Hurricane Katrina in 2003 was the largest insurable loss known to the United States as a whole in our history. If that loss that happened back in 2003, I believe it was about a $55 billion loss at the time. If you use inflation, that's about a $102 million loss compared to today's dollars. These fires in Southern California, again, we're estimating it was 35 to 50. So the insurance industry will take this on the chin and keep going. It's not, I have some real estate developer friends that are like, oh my God, Bruce, what do we do? There's not gonna be any insurance available for the projects we're building. Should we stop building? I'm like, no, it's gonna be fine. It's gonna cost slightly more, but it is now an impeding factor. You wanna go buy a beautiful house that's up interfacing into the wild brush area. You might wanna call people like us first and say, hey, Bruce, how much is this gonna cost to insure this house? And we might say, does it have wrapped lines? Is it buried utilities?
Underground? Yeah.
Underground, you have water, is it sprinklered? I mean, there's a lot of questions that maybe you may or may not be able to do, but I hope,
I would insert another question. Should you even build there?
right, should you even build it? Well, that's the whole thing with developers, right?
Right.
So, but I would
And
hope
but also
that,
from a climate perspective too,
Correct.
not just from a risk.
Yeah, you're taking
but
out more forest.
ecosystem.
Exactly.
Yeah.
Exactly.
So that's the public part speaking. In other words, can the government and should the government be in a position of saying, sorry, it's too much here, let's stop doing that?
Yeah, 'cause they
as
have to
opposed to the
protect us
person
when
that
the
says,
fire
I would
happens.
like a nice view and I'd like the trees and all that stuff. Okay, well then, but then do you take on that risk? What are the ways to mitigate the risk? What's the way to make Bruce comfortable and to give Nina comfort that she's not going to have to be there? Right? And for Anuj, how are we going to say, let's get power there and we're not going to have a problem there, right? You want to react to that? Sorry.
I can offer an example. I mean, I'm
Please.
just thinking about the theme of, the silver lining, the opportunities within the disaster. So for Edison, we don't serve the Palisades directly, but we have portions of Malibu that we serve that were impacted by a fire, and obviously Altadena. And in that instance, what we're discovering is that there is, where we're looking at undergrounding about 20 miles of infrastructure in Malibu, and we're looking at an additional 10 as well for targeted undergrounding. And then on the Altadena side, we're looking at anywhere from 20 to 80 miles of undergrounding. And what I think is, the silver lining here is that typically undergrounding of infrastructure is an extremely expensive endeavor. So
Very
we think about safety, reliability, and affordability. Some of the quotes you'll get from investor-owned utilities in California for doing that, and these are probably a little dated, are anywhere from $1.6 million a mile to $6.1 million a mile for undergrounding. So extremely expensive to do, right? However, and that's mostly in the context of trying to retrofit a neighborhood into undergrounding, which is something we hear a lot about from our customers. But with the situations that we have with these wildfires, what we're realizing is there's an alignment here of interest from the neighbors, from each of the residents, interest from our local government, interest from state agencies, related agencies that would be responsible for permitting underground, for us to basically be able to evaluate these situations as what we call greenfield opportunities. And greenfield opportunities are essentially like, a brand new development that's being built. And our standard for that is to underground at that point. And what we're discovering here is that we have something akin to a greenfield opportunity. And what that does is it makes the cost of undergrounding comparable to the cost of, I'll say, overgrounding. And so the cost drops significantly at that point. And so that's, I think, an example of a response that allows these communities to at least have one component of what an insurer might ask about in the future, right?
Sure. And that's a fire. What else do we have in California?
Earthquakes?
And when you underground utilities,
Yeah.
and there's an earthquake,
Big problem.
finding
What
it
happens?
and fixing it takes a lot longer and costs more.
It does, and I think in Florida, there's been hurricanes where both underground infrastructure and overground infrastructure has been impacted. And for the underground stuff, it's because of flooding, and we do have that risk here as well, of course.
Yeah. Yeah, so all of this stuff, again, if you read The Ecology of Fear, it's coming. It's here. Nina, you have work to do to educate people about what to do and how to do it, but it's coming. The question is, how do we make it do what we need to do in the market so that Bruce feels comfortable writing the policy, so that people know what to do and take care of their homes, and what part do MBAs play in that? What role do you want to play? I asked you, what's stopping you? I guess the larger policy issues, what are the policy issues that are helping or stopping you? Clearly money, if you went for $5 billion, right? Is there something stopping you all from doing what you need to do? You talked about the insurance industry, right? What's stopping you is the insurance commissioner saying
That's a big part
you
of it.
can't make a fair wage, right?
And I would say funding for me, obviously,
Funding.
as a nonprofit.
Okay, so funding, and what does that mean for all of you? Your rates are going up, or your prices are going up, or what? I mean, at a certain point, even when you say, well, the government should fund it, well, who do you think's funding the government? I mean, at a certain point, we live in California, right? And so you have this balance that a private industry has the people that'll tell you what the risk is. You can document chapter and verse about where you're going to be and what's next, right? And the utilities, you have all the projections about what you need to protect your system. I guess I will give the last couple of minutes. Each of you, why don't you tell them what you think, where they could do well by doing good. Where could they help you in this space? Let's start with you, Anuj. What can they tell Pedro Pizarro, who's the CEO of Edison, that they have the next great idea?
Yeah, I mean, I guess I could go back to what we were talking about a little bit earlier. Is when it comes to this particular set of risks and the kinds of things we need to be thinking about, I would just want to emphasize that the kinds of solutions we need are around raising adaptation awareness, raising awareness of how we respond to these risks that are hitting us today, not out in the future. I think that Nina's work focuses on this as well, but also really taking action and understanding that as you're building solutions of tomorrow or helping scale solutions that exist today, really need to be thinking about how is this going to land in the community? How is this going to land with regulators? When I just brought up that Greenfields example with Malibu and Altadena and the cost differential there, a lot of that cost differential will be associated with being able to line up all of the permitting, being able to line up all of the neighbors to be able to it's an either or when it comes to overground versus underground for a community, right? Everybody's got to be willing to let us underground come through their home in order to do that if we're doing that in more of a retrofit context. So, it's really important to be thinking about your solutions, how they're going to land, whether they have an impact on frontline communities as well. We don't get to we never work just kind of being able to do our own thing. There's always a regulator, there's always a community member, there's always adjacent industries that we need to be thinking about when we are ultimately a place-based. We're a place-based service. We don't expand beyond our service areas. So all these partnerships are really important.
Nina?
I would say, continuing on the public-private and community partnerships, but also looking at businesses, right? We don't have a representative here of, true like corporation or a business that was impacted, but there is going to be a new law that California is putting in place, and I wrote it down, SB 261, which is the climate risk disclosure law, that is going to require all U.S. businesses who do business in California, and obviously all California businesses up to a certain dollar amount in revenue, are required to disclose what those risks are. Well, for a long time, again, it's kind of been this sort of like, okay, the business is by itself and then the public is over here. But as they start talking about these risks, this is a risk to the community. So if your business is in a community, that risk is also the risk of everyone around you. It's the risk of your employees and your labor market. It's the risk of your customers. It's a risk to your manufacturing, to your logistics. So taking into account that and then talking with the community members and say, hey, we have a collective risk here. How are we going to manage it? I need to manage it for my bottom line. You need to manage it for your safety and security. Bring in the community members who can help that. But really, taking where the money is, right, in corporations and business, and government listens to them and, really kind of put pressure on them to do more. Not like giving away money. Corporate social responsibility offices are great. But for big problems like this, you need more. You need a lot more.
There was a real quick question about where should we go if we want to volunteer and help out. Whoever asked that question, I would just talk to Nina.
Yeah, coreresponse.org. No, there's a lot of volunteer opportunities. Hey Climate is another great social community. The Carbonauts is another one. If you guys have known about that, it takes like social sort of like getting groups together to do climate action work, but in more of a social setting.
Social infrastructure,
yes,
CABA.
social infrastructure.
And quick, because we're getting the hurry up.
Sorry.
Look, that's volunteer. We all should do it. We all want to help it. Coming back to the whole point here, though, is how do you do well by doing good? How can you make a lot of money by doing good to fill a niche in the market? You might be able, while you're volunteering, you may see that niche. You're going to see the things that's missing, right? I need an app, I need something. it's okay to monetize a good idea. You should, right? So you get the final word here.
Well, I would love to hear in the coming years that some brilliant minds from Anderson School of Management came up with a scalable foam suppression system to put out fires on a home on the exterior just because they heard this brilliant speaker speak at one of the conferences.
Right.
Something like that, something that you could do in the space of hardening properties, because it's not just California, people. I mean, this is everywhere.
Yeah.
This isn't up in Canada. This is all over Oregon. This is happening in Washington.
Utah.
So it's not just here. So it's not a Southern California problem with this. So we're going to need somebody to come up with some of these brilliant ideas. And I would be thrilled to make zero money off of one of you kids doing, I say kids, I'm sorry. That's offensive. One of you guys in this room saying, hey, we're going to develop this system. And also, we could use more smarter people in the insurance industry. So if some of you MBAs want to maybe look at the insurance industry, it's not as boring as it sounds. I've been doing it over 25 years now. So I think it's a great industry. We need innovators in this industry as well. It's a staunch old business, but we can always use new ideas.
Great. Who in this room knows what a fire escape is? Who's seen one in real life?
Who's been on one?
Yeah, who's been on one? Most East Coasters really know it.
Yeah.
Right? You think somebody just said, you know what would be a great idea? Let's just have fire escapes. That'd be great. No. It came because there's a fire, and a lot of people died in fires. They said, you know what? Every building's going to have a fire escape. And somebody's got to make the fire escape. Somebody's got to install the fire escape. Somebody's got to inspect the fire escape. Maintain it. Those are ideas that come out of tragedy. I get it. It's a tragedy, and it's terrible. Where I live, I don't even want to talk about it. Neither you firsthand. Think hard about what's going on and where you can lean in and help out. Right. So, public-private partnership. You're right. It kind of melds what's public, what's private, and all that. It just means thinking hard, figure out where the idea is, and go to where the problem is and fix it. Right? Mm-hmm. So, thank you very much, guys.
Thank you, guys.
Thanks, you too.